Guard your private parts before your desires destroy your life. I recently found myself reading about the cases involving young Philly and Micheal Ward, two successful young black men whose names became attached to serious allegations concerning private sexual encounters. How was successful young men with careers, opportunities and people depending on them repeatedly finding themselves in private sexual situations with women they hardly know, where everything that happens afterwards depends on two very different accounts of the same night? Why do we keep treating sexual access as an achievement rather than recognizing the risks, responsibilities and consequences that come with it? And why have we reduced the Islamic instruction to guard our private parts to nothing more than don't have sex before marriage? But I also believe guarding our private parts is also about guarding ourselves from our lowest and most basic desires. It means understanding that desire can distort our judgment. It can make intelligent people behave foolishly. It can make successful people risk everything they've spent years building. It can make men mistake attraction for entitlement, attention for consent, and somebody entering a hotel room, car, or home as permission for anything that follows. Islam doesn't simply tell us to avoid the final act. It tells us to lower our gaze. It warns us about intoxication. It places boundaries around privacy. It teaches modesty. It encourages marriage. It encourages fasting when marriage isn't possible. All of that tells me that Islam understands sexual desire as something powerful that needs to be managed before it manages us. We live in a culture that often presents this kind of discipline as repression. We're told that sexual freedom means doing whatever we want, with whomever we want, whenever the opportunity presents itself. But looking at the destruction that can follow some of these encounters, I'm not convinced that what we call freedom is always freedom. Sometimes it's slavery to appetite. Sometimes it's insecurity disguised as confidence. Sometimes it's loneliness disguised as sexual access. And sometimes it's exploitation disguised as fun. There's also a more uncomfortable conversation that we need to have within parts of our community. I'm not saying black people are naturally more sexually immoral than anybody else. That would be dishonest, and it would feed directly into all racist stereotypes about black men being sexually aggressive and black women being sexually available. But resisting racist stereotypes doesn't mean we should become silent about destructive behaviour when we see it among our people. There are things we've normalised, laughed at and hidden behind slang that should deeply disturb us. I'm thinking particularly about what some people call running a battery, where several men have sex with the same women, sometimes one after the other, sometimes in the same room, and sometimes in circumstances involving alcohol, intimidation, pressure, or a woman who may not be in a position to give meaningful consent. Even the phrase running a battery tells us something. It removes the human being at the center of what's happening. The woman becomes an object that a group of men are using. The men can then describe it as a game, a story, or some kind of group achievement without having confronted the possibility that what took place involved coercion, humiliation, or gang rape. Where consent isn't freely and continuously given, we shouldn't soften the language. That isn't a wild night. That isn't men being men. That isn't running a battery. That's sexual violence. But even in situations where the women appears to consent, I still think we should question what's being celebrated when multiple men want to have sex with the same woman, one after the other, while watching or waiting for each other. Where's the dignity in that? Where's the intimacy? Where's the respect for the woman or even for themselves? At that point, you might as well rub all your bell ends together, because the whole performance appears to be less about intimacy with a woman and more about seeking approval and validation from other men. The woman becomes the object through which the men bond with each other, yet somehow is presented as proof of heterosexual masculinity. Nobody seems willing to ask why a man needs his friends in the room, why he needs them waiting outside, why they all need access to the same woman, or why the story only becomes valuable once it can be repeated to other men. That doesn't look like confidence to me. It looks like insecurity. It looks like men who are so desperate to prove something to each other that they're willing to abandon privacy, dignity, and basic human decency. And too often the woman is left carrying the physical, emotional, and social consequences, while the men treat it as another story for the group chat. We also need to question how pornography has shaped what some of the young men now think sex is supposed to look like. Sex is increasingly presented as aggressive, performative, and degrading. Men are taught to focus on domination rather than connection. Women are expected to tolerate pain and humiliation to prove that they're adventurous. Choking, slapping, spitting, and biting can become normalized without a serious conversation about consent, sexual danger, or why somebody needs violence in order to experience intimacy. We often speak about protecting women by telling women what to wear, where to go, and how not to behave. Men can't outsource the responsibility for their desires to women. A woman drinking alcohol doesn't remove our responsibility. A woman flirting doesn't remove our responsibility. A woman entering a hotel room doesn't remove our responsibility. A woman agreeing to one sexual act doesn't remove our responsibility to seek consent for what happens next. I don't think Islam's sexual boundaries are designed to deny us pleasure. I think they're designed to stop pleasure from becoming our master. Because once a person loses control of their desires, they can also lose control of their reputation, their relationships, their livelihood, their freedom, and most importantly, their humanity.